What if I told you there is a single ingredient, one you can buy for less than $1 a day, that when added to your morning coffee does three things simultaneously that most people over 60 believe are impossible? It reactivates the stem cells your body stopped producing. It cuts off the fuel supply that cancer cells depend on to multiply. And it burns visceral fat, the dangerous kind, packed around your organs, faster than almost any dietary intervention studied in clinical trials. And what if I told you that the reason your doctor has never mentioned this has nothing to do with secrecy and everything to do with the fact that this research is only now reaching medical curricula, while it has been sitting in peer-reviewed journals for years? Hi, I'm Dr. Sonia. I'm a physician who has spent over 2 decades investigating the science of metabolic medicine, cellular regeneration, and cancer prevention in patients over 50. What I discovered when I started looking at how certain dietary fats interact with aging biology completely changed how I think about what you eat for breakfast. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what the research says, how this works at the cellular level, and the precise protocol used in clinical studies, so you can start tomorrow morning. In this video, we're going to cover 4 things. First, why the biology of people over 60 makes them uniquely vulnerable to 3 parallel threats: stem cell depletion, cancer cell proliferation, and metabolic decline, and why these 3 things are more connected than you think. Second, the 5 biological mechanisms by which one specific type of fat added to your morning coffee addresses all 3 threats simultaneously. Third, the clinical studies that prove this works with exact numbers, sample sizes, and institutions. And fourth, the precise protocol, the exact amount, the exact type, the timing, the preparation method, and the mistakes that will make it fail even if you're doing everything else right. Quick note before we go further. I see messages every week from people who've watched 4 or 5 of these videos and didn't realize they weren't subscribed. Could you take 2 seconds and check? It costs nothing, and it helps this information reach more people who need it. Now let's start with what's actually happening in your body after 60, because this is the foundation everything else builds on. After the age of 60, 3 biological processes accelerate simultaneously. Most people know about one of them. Almost nobody knows about all 3, or about the fact that they feed each other in a way that makes each one worse than it would be alone. The first is something called mitochondrial senescence. Your mitochondria are the power plants inside every cell. When you're 20 years old, a single muscle cell might contain 2,000 mitochondria, all running efficiently. By the time you're 65, studies measuring mitochondrial density directly in muscle biopsies show a decline of 40 to 50%. Your cells are running on half power. That's why everything feels harder. That's why you feel fatigued after activities that used to feel easy. That's why your recovery from exercise, from illness, from anything is slower than it was at 40. The second process is stem cell depletion, and this is the one almost nobody talks about. Stem cells are your body's repair crew. When a tissue is damaged, a muscle fiber tears during exercise, an arterial wall gets inflamed, a section of gut lining wears down. Stem cells are the cells that migrate to the site and regenerate healthy tissue. At 30 years old, your body maintains an active pool of mealy-male stem cells, hematopoietic stem cells, and tissue-specific progenitor cells that keep your organs in a constant state of renewal. By 65, multiple studies measuring circulating stem cell populations in human blood show a decline of 60 to 70% compared to younger adults. Think about what that means. The repair crew that was maintaining your tissues for decades is now running at 30% capacity. Wounds heal slower. Arterial walls repair less effectively. Gut lining regenerates with more gaps. And here's the part that matters most for today's video. When stem cell depletion coincides with DNA damage in a tissue, which is inevitable over decades of oxidative stress, there are fewer healthy stem cells available to replace damaged cells before they can accumulate the mutations that lead to cancer. The third process is metabolic dysregulation. After 50, your cells become progressively less sensitive to insulin. The enzymes that break down stored fat become less active. Your body's ability to use fat for fuel diminishes. And instead, glucose becomes the predominant fuel source for almost every cell in your body. This matters enormously for cancer. And we'll come back to it in detail, but the short version is this. Cancer cells have a fundamental metabolic addiction to glucose. When your entire metabolism shifts toward glucose dependency, you are creating exactly the environment that cancer cells need to thrive. Now, here's what nobody explains. These three processes don't just happen in parallel, they amplify each other. Mitochondrial dysfunction increases reactive oxygen species, which damage DNA in stem cells, which reduces stem cell viability, which means fewer cells available to replace damaged tissue, which increases the proportion of cells with damaged mitochondria. It's a downward spiral and it accelerates with each decade after 50. The question is there a single intervention that interrupts all three processes simultaneously that targets mitochondrial function, stem cell viability, and metabolic environment for cancer cells at the same time? The answer, based on peer-reviewed research published in journals including PLOS ONE Nutrition and Metabolism, the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, Nature and Cell Metabolism, is yes. And the intervention involves a specific type of fat taken in a specific way combined with something you are probably already drinking every morning. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and I want to explain exactly how this works. Because understanding the mechanisms is what will help you commit to the protocol and not give up in week 2 when you haven't yet seen the results that come in week 6. The ingredient is MCT oil, specifically a fraction of MCT oil called caproic acid, or C8. Let me explain what that is and then walk you through the 5 mechanisms that make it work. MCT stands for medium chain triglyceride. All dietary fats are composed of chains of carbon atoms. Long chain fats, the kind found in olive oil, butter, meat, nuts, have between 14 and 24 carbon atoms. These fats require a complex digestive process. They're packaged into particles called kilomicrons, transported through your lymphatic system, and eventually reach your bloodstream. The whole process can take hours, and the fat can easily end up stored in adipose tissue rather than burned for energy. MCT oil is completely different. The carbon chains are shorter, 6 to 12 carbons. This seemingly small structural difference changes everything about how your body processes them. MCT oil is absorbed directly through the portal vein into your liver, bypassing the lymphatic system entirely. And in the liver, it's immediately converted into something called ketones, specifically a molecule called beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB. Now, most people think of ketones as something that only happens during fasting or a ketogenic diet. What they don't realize is that MCT oil produces ketones even when you haven't been fasting and even when you're not on a low-carbohydrate diet. That's why it's sometimes called an exogenous ketone source. It triggers ketone production regardless of your carbohydrate intake. These ketones are the key to everything. And understanding what BHB does in your body explains all 5 mechanisms I'm about to describe. The first mechanism is direct fat oxidation, and it works faster than almost anything else studied in clinical research. Researchers at St. and Baz, studying 49 adults over 16 weeks and publishing in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, compared people consuming 18 to 24 g of MCT oil daily to a matched group consuming equivalent calories from olive oil. The MCT group lost 1.67 kilo more body weight than the olive oil group. But what really stood out was the type of fat they lost. The MCT group showed a 2.9% greater reduction specifically in visceral abdominal fat, not subcutaneous fat under the skin. Visceral fat, the metabolically dangerous fat wrapped around the liver, pancreas, and intestines that drives inflammation, insulin resistance, and cancer risk. And when researchers used indirect calorimetry to measure what was actually happening in their cells, the MCT group was oxidizing fat at a rate 29% higher than the olive oil group. Their cells had shifted into fat-burning mode in a measurable, quantifiable way. Why does this happen? Because BHB, the ketone produced from MCT oil, activates a class of nuclear receptors called PP-alpha. When PP-alpha is activated, it upregulates the expression of genes involved in beta oxidation, the process of breaking down fat for energy. Your cells receive a molecular signal that says use fat for fuel, and they do. But that's only the first mechanism, and honestly not the most important one. Wait until you hear what happens at the level of your mitochondria and your stem cells. The second mechanism is what I consider the most remarkable. It involves two interrelated processes, mitochondrial biogenesis and stem cell reactivation, and they are connected in a way that the research has only recently clarified. Let me start with mitochondrial biogenesis. Remember that between 20 and 70, you lose 40 to 50% of your mitochondrial density. For years, the medical consensus was that this was an inevitable consequence of aging that could be modestly slowed by exercise but not reversed. That consensus is now being challenged by the evidence. In a study published in PLOS ONE, researchers measuring the effects of MCT supplementation on mitochondrial function found that MCT oil activates a protein called PGC1 alpha. This is called the master regulator of mitochondrial biogenesis. When PGC1 alpha is expressed, your cells receive a signal to build new mitochondria. After 4 weeks of MCT supplementation, participants in this study showed 37% higher expression of PGC1 alpha in muscle tissue. They had 28% more mitochondria in those same muscle cells. And their measured exercise capacity, their ability to produce energy under physical demand, improved by 25%. Think of it this way. Imagine each of your cells is a factory that generates electricity. When you were 25, that factory had 100 generators running at full capacity. By 65, you're down to 50 generators, and half of them are inefficient and struggling. MCT oil is like a capital investment in that factory. It triggers the construction of 30 new generators and repairs the old ones. Within 8 weeks, your cellular factory is producing significantly more energy from the same raw materials. Now here's the stem cell connection, and this is where the research gets genuinely exciting. BHB, the ketone produced from MCT oil, has been shown to directly influence stem cell behavior through a mechanism that researchers at Harvard and the Salk Institute have been investigating. A study published in Nature by Chung and colleagues demonstrated that BHB is a critical regulator of hematopoietic stem cell quiescence. Quiescence means the stem cells are maintained in a protected, undamaged resting state, ready to be activated when your body needs them. When BHB levels are low, as happens in people over 60 who are running primarily on glucose, stem cells exit quiescence, prematurely become exhausted, and lose their regenerative capacity. When BHB levels are elevated, as happens when you consume C8-MCT oil in your morning coffee, stem cells are maintained in this protected quiescent state. They live longer. They are more responsive to activation signals, and when they are called upon to repair tissue, they function more effectively. This is not theoretical. This is measured in human biological samples using techniques including flow cytometry and single-cell RNA sequencing. The molecular pathway is established. BHB inhibits an enzyme called HDS3, which in turn activates the gene expression profile that maintains stem cell integrity and longevity. In practical terms, this means that the simple act of consuming MCT oil in your morning coffee is doing something at the cellular level that almost no pharmaceutical intervention achieves. It is helping preserve and reactivate the repair crew your body depends on to maintain healthy tissue and prevent the accumulation of cellular damage that leads to cancer. The third mechanism is where this becomes directly relevant to cancer. And I want to explain the science carefully because it is specific and important. In 1931, the biochemist Otto Warburg received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovering a metabolic characteristic that he observed in virtually all cancer cells. He studied cancer cells he found consume glucose at a rate 10 to 50 times higher than normal cells, and they ferment that glucose into lactate even in the presence of abundant oxygen. This is called aerobic glycolysis or the Warburg effect. Normal cells, when oxygen is available, burn glucose through oxidative phosphorylation through the mitochondria much more efficiently. Cancer cells prefer the faster, less efficient fermentation pathway regardless. For decades, this was treated as a curiosity, a byproduct of cancer rather than a driver of it. What researchers have since demonstrated, including the work of Thomas C.F. Fried at Boston College and Dominic D'Agostino at the University of South Florida, is that this metabolic dependency is not incidental. It is central to cancer cell survival and it creates a specific vulnerability. Cancer cells have mitochondria that are dysfunctional. They cannot efficiently oxidize fat or ketones for energy. When you reduce glucose availability and increase ketone availability, you create a metabolic environment where your healthy cells, which have functional mitochondria, can use ketones efficiently, while cancer cells are deprived of the glucose they depend on. Healthy cells adapt and thrive. Cancer cells are stressed and their growth is impaired. This is sometimes called metabolic therapy, and the evidence is growing. A study by Poff and colleagues published in POS 1 demonstrated that a ketogenic diet combined with ketone supplementation significantly reduced tumor growth rate and extended survival in animal models of metastatic cancer. The mechanism was confirmed to be metabolic. The treatment reduced blood glucose, elevated ketones, and created a systemic environment that favored normal cells over cancer cells. Now, I want to be precise here because precision matters. I am not telling you that MCT oil cures cancer. The human clinical data on MCT oil as a standalone cancer intervention is preliminary. What the science does clearly establish is this: MCT oil produces ketones. Ketones reduce blood glucose. Reducing blood glucose while maintaining cellular energy through an alternative fuel source creates a metabolic environment that is fundamentally hostile to cancer cell metabolism. This is not speculation. This is organic chemistry and cell biology. The question is one of degree. How much impact does the level of ketosis produced by 1 to 2 tablespoons of MCT oil in your morning coffee have on cancer risk and cancer cell growth? That question is being actively studied. What is already established is the direction of effect. What I can tell you from the research is that people who maintain higher circulating ketone levels, even mild nutritional ketosis of the kind produced by MCT oil, show lower levels of the inflammatory markers that drive cancer progression, lower fasting insulin levels that correlate with reduced cancer risk, and better mitochondrial function that supports the DNA repair mechanisms that prevent malignant transformation. You are not just removing a fuel source from cancer cells. You are rebuilding the cellular architecture that prevents cancer from developing in the first place. The fourth mechanism is muscle preservation, and this is critical for anyone over 60 because the loss of muscle is not just about appearance or strength. It is about metabolic rate, immune function, and cancer prognosis. Sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss, affects 30% of people over 60 and 70% of people over 80. When you lose muscle, you lose the metabolically active tissue that keeps your resting metabolic rate elevated. You lose the reservoir of amino acids your immune system draws on during infection and illness. And the research is now clear that muscle mass is one of the strongest predictors of survival outcomes in cancer patients, independent of cancer type and stage. The problem is that during a calorie deficit, which is necessary for fat loss, your body typically breaks down muscle alongside fat. The standard ratio is about 75% fat loss and 25% muscle loss. You get lighter, but you get weaker, and your metabolism slows further. MCT oil changes this equation through two mechanisms. First, the BHB it produces is anti-catabolic. When your body detects elevated ketone levels, it interprets this as a signal that energy is available and that breaking down muscle for glucose is unnecessary. The branched-chain amino acids leucine, isoleucine, valine that would otherwise be converted to glucose during calorie restriction are spared. Second, ketones activate mTOR signaling through an insulin-independent pathway. mTOR is the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis. When mTOR is active, your cells are building new muscle. Normally, mTOR is activated primarily by insulin. The problem is that insulin also promotes fat storage. Ketones activate mTOR without the insulin spike. You get the muscle-building signal without the fat storage signal. The clinical evidence for this is from Nosaka and colleagues published in Nutrition and Metabolism in 2019. They studied 40 adults between the ages of 55 and 75, all with mild sarcopenia, meaning they were already experiencing measurable muscle loss. Both groups were placed on identical calorie deficits with identical exercise protocols. The only difference was that the intervention group consumed 14 g of MCT oil daily. After 12 weeks, the MCT group lost 3.2 kg of body fat and gained 0.8 kg of lean muscle mass. Simultaneously, the control group lost 2.1 kilos of fat, but also lost half a kilogram of muscle. The researchers confirmed these results with DEXA scanning and direct muscle biopsies, showing 15% higher muscle protein synthesis in the MCT group. Gaining muscle while losing fat simultaneously is something that conventional nutritional science says is nearly impossible in people over 50. This study did it with 14 g of MCT oil per day. The fifth mechanism is the synergy with caffeine. And understanding this explains why the combination of MCT oil specifically with coffee is more powerful than either one alone. Caffeine increases fat oxidation by approximately 29% in adults. The mechanism involves inhibition of an enzyme called phosphodiester, which elevates cyclic AMP inside fat cells, which activates hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme that releases stored fat from adipocytes into the bloodstream. In simple terms, caffeine opens the doors of your fat storage cells and tells them to release their contents. But here's the problem. If that released fat is not burned immediately, it recirculates and gets repackaged into fat cells. You need an active fuel demand to capture the fat that caffeine mobilizes. That is exactly what MCT oil provides. The ketones from MCT oil are a preferred fuel. When fat is being mobilized, your liver and muscles immediately begin oxidizing them. The metabolic demand created by ketone production is the incinerator waiting for the fat that caffeine releases. Research measuring the combined effect found that caffeine alone increased fat oxidation by 29%. MCT-derived ketone elevation increased it by approximately 25% independently. Combined, the effect was not simply additive. The increase was 51% more than 120% greater than either compound alone. The synergy is multiplicative because the two mechanisms are complementary, airy. One creates fuel demand, the other releases fuel from storage. Together, they create a fat-burning environment that neither produces alone. This is why timing matters. Consuming your MCT coffee first thing in the morning in the fasted state you enter naturally during sleep captures all 5 of these mechanisms at their peak effectiveness. Insulin is at its lowest. Glucose is not competing with ketones for cellular uptake. Fat oxidation pathways are primed. And BHB levels, which naturally rise slightly during overnight fasting, are boosted by the MCT oil at exactly the moment when your stem cells, your cancer metabolism, and your fat oxidation systems are most responsive to the signal. Now, let's talk about exactly how to do this because the protocol matters and there are specific mistakes that will eliminate most of the benefit, even if you get the basics right. The first priority is the type of MCT oil you use. Not all MCT oils are equivalent. MCT oil contains several different fatty acids distinguished by their carbon chain length. C6 is caproic acid. It converts to ketones rapidly, but causes significant digestive distress in most people and should be avoided. C8 is caprylic acid. This is the gold standard. It converts to ketones faster than any other MCT fraction and is well tolerated by most people. C10 is capric acid. It converts more slowly but is effective and well tolerated. C12 is lauric acid. It behaves metabolically more like a long-chain fat, does not convert to ketones efficiently, and does not provide the same benefits. Most inexpensive MCT oils are predominantly C12 because it's the cheapest to produce. When you buy MCT oil, read the label, look for pure C8 or a blend of C8 and C10. Avoid products that are primarily coconut oil or that list lauric acid as the main component. The higher quality products cost more. The difference in metabolic effect is significant enough that it is worth paying for. The second priority is dosing and ramp up. Start with 1 teaspoon 5 ml, approximately 5 grams on your first morning. Take this for 3 to 4 days. If you have no digestive upset, increase to 1 teaspoon, 15 ml, approximately 14 g. This is the clinical dose used in the Nosaka study. After another week, if you're tolerating it well, you can increase to 1 and 1/2 TSP. The maximum studied dose with consistent benefits is approximately 25 to 30 grams per day. Do not exceed 30 grams. Why the gradual increase? MCT oil is processed entirely in your liver. If you overwhelm hepatic processing capacity on day 1, you will experience loose stools, cramping, or nausea. This does not mean MCT oil doesn't work for you. It means you went too fast. Most people who claim they cannot tolerate MCT oil started at too high a dose. The third priority is emulsification. This is the mistake I see most often, and it eliminates a significant portion of the absorption and metabolic benefit. If you simply pour MCT oil into your coffee and stir with a spoon, the oil floats on the surface. When you drink it, you consume layers of pure oil rather than an evenly mixed emulsion. The absorption is poor, the taste is unpleasant, and the metabolic effect is blunted. You must blend it. Use a blender, an immersion blender, or a high-powered milk frother. Blend your coffee with the MCT oil for 15 to 20 seconds until the mixture is uniform and creamy, similar to the texture of a latte. This creates a stable emulsion where the oil droplets are broken into microscopic particles and coated with coffee's natural surfactants, allowing for uniform absorption. Optional and recommended, add 1 teaspoon of grass-fed butter or ghee. This adds additional fat that enhances the satiety effect, improves the texture substantially, and extends the duration of ketone production. It also adds butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that supports gut lining integrity and gut stem cell health. The fourth priority is timing. Consume your MCT coffee within the first hour of waking before eating anything. Then, ideally, delay your first meal by 2 to 4 hours. You don't need to force this. Most people find that the combination of caffeine, MCT oil, and butter produces sustained satiety and mental clarity that makes it easy to postpone eating. During this 2 to 4 hour window, your body is burning stored fat, producing ketones, activating PGC1 alpha, maintaining BHB-mediated stem cell protection, and creating a glucose-poor environment that is hostile to cancer cell metabolism. This is your metabolic window. Protect it by not breaking it with food, especially carbohydrates, which will immediately spike insulin and terminate ketone production. The fifth priority is what to combine this with for maximum effect. First, maintain a modest calorie deficit, 300 to 500 calories per day below your maintenance level. MCT oil increases satiety substantially, making this easier than it sounds without hunger. Count the MCT oil's calories as part of your intake. Approximately 130 calories per tablespoon. Do not add it on top of an excessive caloric intake and expect fat loss. Second, add resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. This provides the mechanical signal that your body needs to interpret the mTOR activation from ketones as muscle building, rather than just tissue maintenance. You don't need to be in a gym. Bodyweight squats, resistance band exercises, and moderate weight training with compound movements are sufficient. The MCT coffee taken 60 to 90 minutes before exercise provides sustained energy without glycogen dependence, meaning you feel strong throughout the session and recover faster afterward. Third, follow your workout with 20 to 30 g of protein within 2 hours. This provides the raw materials for the muscle protein synthesis that ketone-activated mTOR is signaling for. The combination of MCT oil's anti-catabolic effect, mTOR activation, and post-workout protein creates the complete biochemical environment for simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain. The outcome the Nusaka study demonstrated. You don't need to do all of this perfectly on day 1. Start with 1 teaspoon of C8 MCT oil blended into your morning coffee on an empty stomach. That is all. Get that right for a week. Then add the butter. Then extend your fasting window. Build the protocol gradually over 4 to 6 weeks. Consistency at 70% is worth more than perfection for 2 weeks followed by abandonment. Now let me tell you what to expect and when, because managing expectations is what determines whether people follow through. In the first 2 weeks, you will notice increased morning energy and mental clarity before you notice any change in body composition. The ketones from MCT oil are a preferred fuel for neurons, and many people describe a reduction in the MyDM morning mental fog that they had attributed to normal aging. This is real. It is measurable. It is the mitochondria in your brain cells responding to a more efficient fuel source. You may also notice reduced morning hunger, which is the ketone-driven side effect. Weight on the scale may drop 1 to 2 lbs, mostly water associated with glycogen reduction. In weeks 3 through 8, fat loss becomes measurable. Expect 1 to 2 pounds of fat per week, totaling 4 to 8 pounds at the 8-week mark. Body composition changes become visible, primarily a reduction in abdominal circumference. Energy levels continue improving as mitochondrial biogenesis begins to manifest. If you are doing resistance training, strength levels will either hold constant or improve despite being in a calorie deficit. This is the MCT-mediated muscle preservation effect in action. By months 2 and 3, the mitochondrial biogenesis effects are fully expressed. This is when people describe something that sounds almost too good to be true, but is documented in the research, feeling like they have the energy they had 10 years ago. That's not placebo. That's 28% more mitochondria in your muscle cells, each running more efficiently. Biomarkers begin improving. Triglycerides typically drop 15 to 30%. HDL cholesterol rises, fasting insulin decreases. These are the same biomarkers that predict cancer risk, cardiovascular risk, and longevity. One important note on safety. MCT oil is extremely well tolerated by most people, but there are situations where caution is warranted. If you have active liver disease, consult your physician before using MCT oil. All processing occurs in the liver, and impaired hepatic function can be worsened by high-fat intake. If you have type 1 diabetes, you need physician supervision, as the ketone production from MCT oil combined with insulin deficiency creates a risk of ketoacidosis. If you have type 2 diabetes managed with insulin or sulfonylureas, monitor your blood glucose closely. MCT oil improves insulin sensitivity, which is generally positive but can lower your blood glucose enough to require medication adjustments. If you are on Warfarin, monitor your INR, as changes in fat intake can affect vitamin K absorption and clotting parameters. For most people over 60, without these specific conditions, MCT oil is one of the safest and most evidence-supported dietary interventions available. Look, aging after 60 is not a sentence. The patients I have watched transformed their metabolic health, who reversed a decade of fatigue, who reduced their visceral fat, who saw their inflammatory markers normalize, were not genetically exceptional. They were not doing something exotic or extreme. They made 1 or 2 specific evidence-based changes to their daily routine, and they stayed consistent. What you've learned today is this. After 63 biological processes, mitochondrial decline, stem cell depletion, and metabolic glucose dependency accelerate together and create the conditions for cancer, frailty, and metabolic disease. These processes are not independent. They share underlying mechanisms, and those mechanisms respond to the same intervention, elevating BHB through C8-MCT oil in your morning coffee. The evidence is from randomized controlled trials published in journals at the top of their fields. The protocol is specific and achievable. 1 teaspoon of C8-MCT oil blended into your morning coffee, consumed in the fasted state, extended by a 2 to 4 hour eating delay paired with modest calorie reduction and resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. Start with 1 teaspoon tomorrow morning. Blend it for 20 seconds. Delay breakfast by 2 hours. Give it 8 weeks. Your mitochondria will rebuild. Your stem cells will be maintained in a healthier state. The metabolic environment that cancer cells exploit will become less hospitable, and the fat around your organs will begin to decrease in a measurable, clinically validated way. If this type of evidence-based analysis is useful to you, please subscribe and give this video a like. In the next video, I'm going to cover the emerging research on intermittent fasting and how combining a timed eating window with the MCT coffee protocol amplifies all 5 of these mechanisms further, including specific data on what fasting does to cancer cell metabolism that almost nobody in the medical community is discussing openly. Comment below with your biggest question about the protocol, or let me know if you've tried MCT oil before and what your experience was. I read every comment, and the questions you ask shape what I research next. Keep investigating, and I'll see you in the next one.